I'm Mel Albin. I'm the host and the founder of the Jazz Confusion
My
Power
name
Hour.
is Dion Parson, and I'm honored to share my passion of music with you, our listening audience, through my cultural heritage.
Things can change for you too. If you want to be brand new, that is absolutely possible.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Confusion Power Hour. I'm your host, Mel Albin, and I come to you each week. We've been doing this for almost 3 years now, and we've had well over 100 artists on our show. The Power Hour is really devoted to jazz and jazz crossover. We play jazz 24/7, so any of you want to tune in anytime, you'll get some of the best in jazz and smooth jazz, contemporary jazz, jazz R&B, jazz soul, jazz gospel, anything connected to jazz, we play. We want to keep jazz alive and make sure that it stays alive. It's the only unique form of American culture, American artistry. So it's really important that we help to preserve and promote jazz. We take you backstage during the Power Hour. We bring you artists that will share their stories, their music, their passion with you, and you'll learn a little bit more each week about, artists, new music you may not have heard before. And if you have heard and you're a fan, you probably learn a lot more about the artists that you love and enjoy. We broadcast on Source in True HD Dolby. We're one of the only stations doing that, and 4K streaming video. So if you tuned in, you can listen to us or watch us, whatever you prefer. Source is a nonprofit. It's a 503c radio station. And we depend on donations from individuals, from corporations and sponsors, and the artists that appear on our shows. We help them, they help us. So, we appreciate any contributions you can make to the station. If you're so inclined, any amount is okay, whether it's $1 or 100 or 1,000, doesn't make a difference. So if you contribute, we greatly appreciate it. The Power Hour has had over 125 amazing artists, and I've got to know a lot of them, and it's been my pleasure to count many of them as my friends. Some of the artists we've had on the Power Hour include Eric Robeson, Mesa, Brian Culberson, Paul Brown, Raheem Devon, Reagan Whiteside, Alex Harris, Greg Adams, Tom Brown, Costello, Pieces of a Dream, Kamasi Washington, Kiko Matsui, Mesa, Sheryl Crow, Reggie Merrick's, Philip Brandon, J.C. Soul, Maria Antoinette, Jay Brown, Kiko Matsui, Yulia, Blake Aaron, Terry Wollman, Her, Celine Johnson, Erin Stevenson, the late Bobby Caldwell, Jeff Bradshaw, Dion Parson, Tammy McCann, Jeff Beck, Eric Burden, Mavis Swan Poole, and Mickey Howard. That's just a sample of the many, many guests we've had on this show. But if you want to tune in each week, you'll find another great artist, and this week is no different. We have a really exceptional artist and a lovely person to introduce you to. Many of you will already know him and his music. So the Power Hour brings only the best in jazz and jazz crossover. So tonight's guest was described in Jazz Review as one of smooth jazz's most prolific saxophonists, with all the required tools to become a major force. Tonight's special guest has his own distinctive and recognizable sound, which incorporates elements of jazz, Latin, funk, and R&B. And he'll leave you spellbound. I mean, he really creates magic with his saxophone. So he was inducted into the West Texas Walk of Fame in 2017. Immediately after graduating college, he launched his first solo album, and the highlight of his first release was having the opportunity to record a duet with his longtime friend, Kirk Whalum. He toured with the great Wayman Tinsdale for 17 years. In 2007, he released Imagine This to rave reviews. A smooth jazz critic wrote, "I'm imagining that this will be the biggest breakout release for a career that is really kicking into high gear." In addition to the sax, a multi-instrumentalist on soprano, alto, and tenor saxophone, he also plays flute and keyboards on many of his arrangements. Throughout the years, he has shared the stage with many well-known artists, including Dave Koz, Rick Braun, Peter White, Candy Duffer, Brian Culbertson, Bob James, George Duke, Earl Krug, Kirk Whalum, Jonathan Butler, Warren Hill, Jeff Golub, Marcus Miller, Kiko Matsui, Aretha Franklin, Luther Vandross, Sheila E., and Philip Bailey. So please welcome tonight's guest. I'm so happy to have him on the show. Please welcome Tom Braxton.
Hello, Mel. How you doing?
Great, Tom. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too, and hello to the Power Hour audience.
Thank you. I'm sure we're going to have plenty of people. I already see we have like over 80,000 people kicking in, and we just started, so it'll be a good crowd tonight.
Fantastic.
So, yep. I'd like to start off the show each week, Tom, by asking my special guest to tell everybody what's cooking, what's going on in 2024, the rest of it in 2025, any new releases, concerts, projects. So why don't you share that?
Well, it's actually a busy time right now, and I'm very grateful for that because performing quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I'll be in the Detroit area on Saturday, the 31st, and have been doing quite a bit of traveling this summer. Plus, we released a single, which we're going to talk about later. So I was preparing that, and I'm working on the rest of the recording, bit by bit. So I'm working on some new songs, new material, and I'm actually producing a Christmas project for a vocalist. So, and my wife is recording an audio book, so I'm producing that too. So it's a very great time. The rest of 24 and into 25, my agent is Gina McCain, who's awesome, is working on 25, and we've still got quite a few dates coming up the rest of this year. So it's a creative time, it's a busy time, and a very thankful time.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad you're keeping so busy. It's always nice because the alternative is not nearly as good.
Very true.
So let's start off telling the audience a little bit, Tom, about your childhood. I know you started playing the sax at an early age, and you grew up in the same town as Buddy Holly. So why don't you tell everybody about, your musical household? I know you had a close relationship with your father, so why don't you explain all of that to everybody?
Oh, very musical household. I actually started playing the piano because my sister was taking piano lessons. And so she was taking piano lessons, and that intrigued me. So I started taking piano lessons. I think I was about 8 years old. And then my father was a band director and orchestra director. So he did both. He taught band and orchestra. So one day, I think I was about 11 years old, he brought home an alto saxophone. And that began the journey of me playing the saxophone. So I started with the piano, and then added the saxophone to it. Now but I had been listening to music for many years because my father, my parents had us later in their marriage. He grew up on Route 66 in Tulsa. And so he saw the original, as a teenager, he saw the original big bands of Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Chick Webb, Ella Fitzgerald. And as a teen, he snuck in and saw those big bands, and that ignited a passion in him for music. So from an early age, I grew up listening to the likes of Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, his favorite, Lester Young, and a myriad of he was always spinning vinyl. When he was home, he always had records going. So that was the genesis of it for me.
That's great. And why the sax? And I know you just said you started playing at 6 years old.
Well, my father was a tenor player. He played tenor saxophone. And right. I think that was and he didn't force me to because he was a saxophonist, but he brought home an alto and he said, hey, if you want to try this out, let's go for it. And he was my very first teacher. And I just fell in love with the instrument. I didn't know I was going to do it for a living, but I just loved the timbre of it and the sound of it.
That's great. It's really interesting how people pick up an instrument. I know when I had Jeff Bradshaw on, the trombonist, I asked Jeff, what made you choose a trombone? And he said, well, at school, when I tried out for the band, the band teacher said, well, what do you want to play? And he said, well, what do you have? And the only thing he had left was a trombone. And
Wow.
that was it. And that's how he became a trombone player. He
I've
wanted
heard
to play the guitar.
I've heard stories like that where it was the only instrument they had, or
Yeah.
that's all, or my parents, that's what they had, or different things. And that's fascinating to me how we are drawn to certain instruments. And the saxophone, I think because my father played the saxophone, I was drawn to it because he practiced. He was one of those practicing musicians. So I grew up with that sound in the house.
Was there a lot of music in Lubbock? A lot of clubs or music to go to?
Well, not jazz clubs.
That's what I think.
Lubbock is an interesting place because it had a very vibrant musical environment, not necessarily jazz. My father, though, played a lot because there were a lot of country clubs. Back then, there were a lot of dances and different things. And so he had his own little combo. And my uncle played alto sax. He played tenor sax. They had a combo together. And so he was working a lot. He played a lot. As far as me going to, but it's not like I could go hear jazz live a lot. So I grew up, most of it was vinyl, listening that way.
And did you continue playing the sax in public school, in any of the bands or orchestras at school?
Oh, definitely. I was in from beginning band in I think it was about sixth grade, middle school. Actually, back then they called it junior high. I was in the marching band in high school, in my public school there at Lubbock Dunbar High School, and then actually marched at Texas Tech University. I was in the marching band there too. Played alto sax all the way through the school system.
And you majored in music in college?
Yes, sir. As I mentioned, in school I loved school, so there a lot of academic work. I enjoyed it. I was actually valedictorian of my high school. I'm not just bragging.
No, that's right.
But I love school. I love to learn. I wasn't sure what I was going to do until I got to be about a junior in high school. I was also an athlete. I ran track and played basketball because I was about 6'2" at the time. That's short now. but I played basketball and actually went to Texas Tech on a track and band scholarship. So I ran track for Texas Tech for a while. I was in the marching band, jazz band, wind ensemble, and just loved it. Just really did. So yeah, school was awesome.
And are there any music teachers in college that mentored you?
Yes, I mean I took saxophone and flute lessons, and the Don Turner was the saxophone instructor at Texas Tech and the jazz band director at the time, and so I was under his tutelage. My father was my primary teacher in high school and middle school. He didn't see me all the time, but he would definitely pop in on me and give me some instructions along the way. And we had a great relationship.
Did your dad teach you to read music?
From the well, I actually had to read with the piano to start with, but from the very beginning, he started with the Blue Rubank Elementary book for saxophone.
Oh, well.
So he opened it, and so I knew I started reading from the very beginning. So yes, and I'm very thankful for that because that is it's helped me throughout my career to be able to step into a situation and read music.
Yeah, I know a lot of musicians I know, particularly in the UK. A lot of them were really heavy into reading music, so they can go on stage unrehearsed and just be able to play the songs, because they can read so well right on the spot. So it's a great skill.
I endorse that with my students, and I endorse that with young people that ask me, because yes, there are some amazing musicians throughout history who didn't really read that well, that had incredible ears and incredible ability to play. But for me, it has been extremely helpful because I was in a horn section for years on a TV show, and it was all reading. You would just come in, music. And being able to do that even on the jazz cruises, if there were horn charts, just being able to read, all of those skills were very helpful for me.
Yeah, I mentioned before Jeff Bradshaw when I had him on. Jeff was never trained to read, but his dad taught him how to use the trombone as if they were words. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So his trombone style is so unique because it's just different the way he hears music.
I love
And
that.
so yeah, isn't that great? His dad taught him to play the sound like the words and the lyrics.
Bernard Wright, the late great Bernard Wright, he told me when he learned to play standards, he said, go look up the words to some of these standards, like
There you
Autumn
go.
Leaves or Misty or something. He said, know the words, and that will affect how you play it.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
See now, a lot of people don't really know the technical side of what an artist has to learn, how much they have to learn. And we're going to get back to that 'cause I want to talk a little bit later about your evolution of your own unique sound. But we have a comment from Christiane, great show on the Source Radio. And then she made another comment. Good to see you, Mr. Thomas.
All right.
So she's very polite. Very
Yes.
polite.
Thank you, Christy. Good.
So I want to play one of the first song of the night, Tom, because I want people who aren't familiar with your music to become very familiar with it. And for those that are familiar, I know you'll enjoy this one. I want to start off with playing "Hope for Tomorrow." Okay.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
So what's the backstory on "Hope for Tomorrow"?
Well, this was a COVID song. This was when we were shut down, and I was, there were a lot of negatives to COVID for sure, for sure. One of the positives was that since we weren't out playing, I was home writing. So that's when a lot of looking up was during that COVID time. I was busy with other things, but it allowed me to slow down for just a minute and do some writing. So this song was one of the ones I created. And Bob James, who, gosh, I've been listening to him since, well, just say a long time. We played together on the Smooth Jazz Cruise. And when I wrote this, when I heard him playing with me as a duet, and I asked him to do it, and he said yes. And so we got to do this duet together.
That's wonderful. Bob James is a legend in his own right. Some of the music he created in the '60s that started hip hop. Hip hop started sampling Bob James.
Yes.
I mean, and he wasn't too pleased with that. He felt like taking his music, but he's peaceful with it now. But he's been so instrumental in music genres, new ones.
Yeah, and he is so gracious because I consider him a legendary icon, and I'll never forget. We were backstage on the Smooth Jazz Cruise, and he sat in with an artist and just played some incredible things. And I asked him, I said, your approach to improvisation, can you just share any of that with me? And we were talking in the back, and little bit by little bit, everybody left, and he stayed and talked to me for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And
Wow.
I kept telling him, I know you're tired. You can leave anytime. He said, no, I'm enjoying this. And I've had other encounters with him, and he's just always so gracious and delightful and an amazing musician.
Well, a quick Bob James story. I have a friend, Christian D. Masonis, who's a bass player and an excellent bass player. And he had a song he composed called Hispanica. And he was talking to a DJ in the UK because Christian lives here in Virginia. And in the UK, the guy said, if you could have anybody play on that track with you, who would you want? And he said, Bob James. And the guy said, that's really funny because I know Bob James. So he called Bob James, sent him the music, and Bob James said yes and played on Christian's first #1 Latin hit on Billboard. Yeah, that's Bob James. He's just a gracious man.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's him. I mean, I was honored, and when he sent the track back that he performed and he'd added his parts to it, I was just in the studio like, that's what I thought was going to happen, and above what I thought was going to happen. So he did an amazing job, just tasty, beautiful, very creative, and write exactly what we needed.
Yeah, I mean, you've met a lot of great people. Maybe out during the show tonight, you can talk a little bit about some of the other people you've met in music that you had great stories about too. So let's play Hope for Tomorrow for everybody, okay?
Yes, sir.
I love it, Tom. It's a great comment by Lenny Fernandez. This is a great go for a walk music. I love it, Tom.
Yeah, I thanked him in the chat. I said, "Thanks, Lenny. Wait, you got to get out there and get some exercise."
Well, I understand what he meant by that because, it has a beautiful pace to it. It's just, it's just comfortable.
Well, what's funny is when I listen to it, I hear the production end of it. I hear how I have memories of putting it together piece by piece. So, and some of the things, a lot of those things Bob did, I didn't even ask him to do. He just, some of those fills and different things, I was going, oh yes, that's Bob James playing on my project. I can't believe it. Yeah. So he's amazing.
I mean, that's pure genius. He just understands the music so well.
He does.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Who else played on that song?
Well, that was Nate Kearney on the bass. And then I used some Dallas cats to cover, to do the rest of it. That was JT, they call him JT, Jason Thomas on drums, Mark Harper on guitars, Eric Willis on the keyboards. I played some auxiliary keyboards as well. And then the percussionist is slipping away from me. I can't remember, but we had a great time doing that.
Yeah, do you have an MD or do you do all the arranging and charting and scoring and everything yourself?
You're looking at it.
Wow, a one-man show.
That's not always by design, but it happens. You end up doing a lot of it. Yes.
It's interesting too because some artists really want to exert control, so they want to do the charting and scoring. They want to do the arranging. And other artists have a sense that I need somebody else to look at this. I don't want to be so close to it.
I think both viewpoints are very valid because we do have blind spots. We might write something and think it's the greatest thing in the world, and somebody else can go, "Well, have you thought about this or add that or do this?" But you don't. I know sometimes people can have 6, 7 people write a song, but to me that would be complex and maybe too many cooks. But I love getting input. I do have some people that I'll run something by, and this composition is it can be tricky. You want to write something that communicates, but it's also unique to you, and you're trying to fit all that in during the context of a song.
Yeah. Just as an aside, when we talk about being too close to your music, I had on who I call affectionately Uncle Larry from the Barkays, and he told me that they had 20 #2 hits, and I said, "You couldn't write a #1 song, only #2s?" And he said, "No, it wasn't me. It was Michael Jackson."
Oh. Well, if you're going to be a #2, gosh, that's a great person to be a number. Oh my gosh, yeah. I didn't think about that. If there's a certain era, he just, was #1. That's true. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't break through. It was one hit after another. So, we have another comment. Let me see what the other comment is. Linda Salters, love this. So happy and hopeful.
And I know the Stalters. Russell and Linda Stalters are amazing people that we became friends on the Smooth Jazz Cruise many years ago. And they're some awesome people. And so, hi, Linda. Shout out to you. You're listening. She and Russell are amazing.
That's wonderful. I want to talk a little bit about your eclecticism. You do jazz, R&B, probably. I think I've heard some pop in there with some other artists that you performed with. How did you evolve this sophisticated musical style that has Latin jazz and so many different elements in it?
Well, I think you made a great point earlier when maybe we were off the air, but you talked about how an artist they're the summation of how their environment, how they grow up in different. Right. And I call it everybody has their own soup. You know, everybody has their own ingredients that they put in, a little bit of oregano, a little bit of this, a little bit of salt. And my soup, growing up in Lubbock, um, I had the benefit of AM radio. So uh, I'm going way back now, but in the fifth grade, my mother was transferred to a school. She was a teacher, elementary teacher. She was transferred across town. And so I went with her to go to the fifth grade across town. So every morning I had the benefit of listening to AM radio. And I heard everything from the Beatles to Seals and Crofts to Motown to Earth, Wind and Fire to Elton John, the Eagles. I mean, you name it. I heard all of that. Then I was listening to my dad's music. And then, of course, I was influenced by the great Grover Washington, Ronnie Laws, the Crusaders, Jean-Luc Ponty, Spyro Gyra. I was listening to my own. Then I was listening to the current music of the time, which I'm biased. I think the 70s was some of the greatest music ever. So
Agreed.
all of that, so all of this is going on in me, and then you couple that with, of course, music education and different things like that. So I love all the different. I love variety. One of the groups that is one of my favorites is Steely Dan, because
I was gonna mention that. Yeah.
I think that here's Walter Becker and Donald Fagen were able to create music that appealed to the masses, but was unique and creative and artistic. And that to me is the challenge, not to get lost in the market, but to not lose the audience. So there's a juggling act there that happens. So if I answered your question, I think the reason I'm eclectic is because I had so many influences.
You know, you mentioned Steely Dan in the 70s. And, you know, I remember suddenly jazz becomes infused with rock. Santana, there was Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago, and Steely Dan. And then there was Jeff Beck. They all brought jazz to rock. And, you know, not long ago, Eric Clapton sat in with Wynton Marsalis and the orchestra in Lincoln Center, and he played jazz guitar. And he admitted that he's always been a jazz aficionado. He loves jazz.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've got to find a clip of that, because I'm an Eric Clapton fan, and I think you're actually seeing more of that. You're seeing more of this mixture of jazz influencing other forms of music and other forms of music influencing jazz, and you have so many just amazingly artistic people that are creative, that are blending the two. You've got the Robert Glaspers and the different people that I'll listen to and go, wow, that's R&B, but I hear some jazz chord. I hear, you know, and Herbie Hancock was a big part of that. You know, when he was taking his amazing sensibilities and you know, the whole chameleon thing in the 70s and the Headhunters and all that. And you're right, all of this started mixing together, and it still continues.
You know, and you know, I've had Eric Burden on the show, and he left the Animals and went and started War. And that was also jazz influence. And you talk about the 70s, there was so much eclecticism beginning. You know, today you have John Batiste, you have Bruno Mars.
Yes.
And, you know, John Batiste is just a genius at bringing jazz into a contemporary framework.
And by the way, War was my first major concert.
Really?
Yeah, I saw in Lubbock, Texas. I remember I was just a kid. I went to see War and Redbone. Woohoo!
Oh, wow.
I was loving it.
The Leon man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was a period of such great innovation. And, you know, I think you're right. You know, in the UK, and I'm not as familiar with it here, in the UK, there's a whole jazz hip hop movement of young people that are infusing hip hop with jazz, or vice versa. You know, so, you know, yeah, I think that music is alive and well, and it's, you know, very different from a lot of the urban music we hear all the time.
Well, I just to add to what you said, I was on a panel discussion at Earl Clue's Weekend of Jazz, and one of the people in the audience asked, how do we keep this music going into the generation behind us? And that's one of the keys, is what you just said. The youngsters coming up, infusing it with their own taste, playing it their way, that's fine. And having them come out to our concerts. I love it when young people come out and hear this music and they're going, wow, I thought it was going to be this and this and that, but I love it. So we have to keep getting young people involved. I think that's very important.
Yeah, just after the pandemic, when the Newport Jazz Festival kicked off again, I went there and I was amazed. I would say the average age of the audience was 35.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just, I was blown away. And some of the bands they had playing there was so different from anything I've ever heard previously at Newport. And just a lot of young people, really taking the jazz. Now that's why I mentioned John Batiste. He's a big influencer. So tell me, I know you collaborated with Bob James. Who else have you collaborated with that stands out in your mind?
Well, let's see. Yes, Bob was amazing. Bernard Wright, he and I worked together on my first project. He produced that. He happened to be in Dallas at the time because his wife's from Dallas. And we worked on my very first solo project, which was Your Move. And that was, wow. I just remember being in the studio, sitting on the piano bench and him showing me some things because he was prodigious. He was a prodigy. He was playing with Max Roach when he was about 12, 13 years old.
Wow.
And his first record with GRP, he was 15. So he was sharing some ideas from the masters like Miles and Train and different things. It just set me on a trajectory of things I'm still working on. And so he was an amazing influence. Another person I collaborated with was Wayman Tisdale. We wrote together and produced Bounce, the Bounce CD together. And Wayman was just an amazing human being, but so creative as well. I remember, it's a little funny story. We were supposed to go in the studio to work on this project. And it was about 3 weeks before. And I said, well, Wayman, maybe about a month before, I said, so Wayman, what's going on? I know we've been busy, but it's time to get in here and, really work on this stuff. He hadn't done anything. He was just like, yeah. And he just went to the studio in a few days, like somebody cooks up a meal real fast. And when I walked in, he had just all these tunes that he had just picked up. So he just added a special element to music too. He didn't write or play anything unless he really felt it right here. And I learned that from him. I've also spent some time in the studio with legendary Kirk Whalum. We did some collaboration and have played together. And of course, Rick Braun played on a duet with me. So I tell you, every time you work with somebody, you learn something. You do.
We were talking kind of on and off about mentoring and collaboration. And, one of my friends, Curtis Harmon from Pieces of a Dream.
Yes.
They were taken under the wing by Grover Washington Jr. And when they were in high school, they were touring with him. And they literally, with Grover, created smooth jazz, right? To a large extent.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the mentoring is so important. And these collaborations are so important. You grow so much during that process.
I totally agree. And since I do teach, I teach privately, and I have done it for years. I came from an education family. My father taught for decades. My mother taught for decades. I enjoy seeing the next generation of talented people. And I think jazz is in great hands based on what I see coming up. And I love to see the hunger and the creativity and and I believe that that's important. And that's how we keep this music going.
My friend Dion Parson has a show on my station called Sounds of the Diaspora. And Dion is really becoming just a legendary jazz drummer. And, he performs with his 21st Century Band during Caribbean Jazz at Lincoln Center every year. And he teaches at part of the Historic Black College University in St. Thomas. He teaches music. And, he mentors these young students. And they get an opportunity because he has his friends come down from all over the world. These fabulous musicians. and he introduces them. And, when you're in that kind of environment, it speeds up your process so fast. Without that, you're lost in space pretty much.
I agree. I think that environments like that, when you're with other students that are hungry and passionate, I ran into that in college. When I got into college and I went to the School of Music, and everybody's hungry and everybody's working and discovering and growing. And I think the other thing that you get to do as a teacher is not just the music. You get to teach life lessons. You get to tell people about, hey, music can be a microcosm of just living and be, I tell young people basically three things. I tell them, be a professional, always show up on time, be early, look the part. If you're supposed to be dressed this way, dress that way. If you're supposed to do this, be a professional. Kirk Whalum told me years ago, he said, you have one time to make a good first impression. And I took that seriously. And that has allowed me to walk through many doors. And then I tell them, hey, know the business of music, because it is a business. We can talk about that later. And then the other thing I tell them is know your craft. If you're a saxophonist, you need to know how to play that instrument. Don't just fool around with it, learn it. And Kirk was also a big part of that. We met in the 80s, and he has been a student of the saxophone ever since I've met him, a student of it. And we'll text each other, what you working on, man? Or what am I working on? And that was a big thing when we did some clinics together. He said, hey, CWOS, that was his thing, constantly working on something. He said, I'm constantly working. Every time we're backstage, we're sharing ideas.
When I talk with Dion, I mentioned Dion Parson has a show on my station, Source TV Radio. It's a great show, and he had bring on remarkable artists. And he talks a lot about the difference between relationships and networking. Relationships is where the music begins, not networking. Networking is the business of music, but relationships is the music.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to remember that, Mel.
Dion is just fabulous, so maybe I can introduce you guys. You'd enjoy it. Let's play Hub City Jam. I love this, okay? And after we play, you can tell everybody a little about it, okay? All right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is Hub City Jam by Tom Braxton. Okay, well, that's wonderful. We have a great comment from Connie Mason. Given the world today, we all need a bit of hope for tomorrow. This gives me a big boost. Love the arrangement.
Sweet. Thank you, Connie.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the background to Hub City Jam?
Well, Hub City is the nickname for Lubbock, Texas, where I grew up. And it's the hub of the plains. It's like in the middle of this circle of cities. And so I decided to write something fun and up tempo. The whole CD is actually a bit of a look back and forward at the same time, because my father passed away in 2020 of December. So we wanted to do something, a recording that it was kind of the end of an era. We sold the house and everything. So this is kind of a look back at that time. So Hub City is a little salute to my origins, where I grew up. And one of the other songs we're going to do is also a salute to that as well. But that's what it is. The Hub City Jam. Blake Aaron produced that. We produced and wrote that together. And of course, Rick Braun graciously added his wonderful trumpet to it.
Yeah, Blake's been on the show too. Blake's wonderful.
Guy. Yes.
Great guy. Yeah. You know, I got a question. From all the songs you've written, if you could pick one song that you've written and recorded that you think is your best, what would it be?
Oh, that's hard. You know, honestly, I think one of the ones that I'm really proud of, as far as I like the style of it, is Kahanapali Beach. It's a bossa nova that I had fun putting together. Kahanapali Beach is a beach in Maui where we went on our honeymoon. And when I came back from that, I wrote this song, and it just, the way the arrangement worked out and the way it was orchestrated, Kevin Whalum put some vocals on it, and you just have to hear it. Darren DeShazo did a beautiful job on guitar and horn section and everything. I just love the way it came together. So I love playing that one every time I get an opportunity to do so.
You know, I want to have you back on again, Tom. You know, we'll make arrangements for you to come back at some point, and maybe we'll play that and let you pick 4 songs that you think represents what you love in your music.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That should be fun. Tell me about, you know, we talked about some of your early influences, but you have 10 LPs and you're working on your 11th one now. That's right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when you look back at your discography, what do you think that you should have done that you didn't do?
Oh, that's easy. I came from, I'm pre-smooth jazz, so I just love to write music and record it. And during that time, the industry changed. And if one of the things I would have done differently is the industry became very singles oriented, like pop music. And I didn't know that at the time. If I were back in that, if I were talking to my younger self, I would have written more singles to try to chart earlier, versus just writing the music that I wrote and enjoyed playing. So that's the biggest change I would make is paying more attention to the radio trends, I guess is what I would say.
I also know that you write a lot of your music, but you do some covers also.
Yes.
How do you choose covers? How do you go about doing that?
Well, the number one thing is I just like the song. That's number one. Number two is I have to see how it feels on the saxophone. One of my favorite covers is Peg that we did on the Imagine This project. And that was just something I just decided to do. And the first time we performed it, it was at an outdoor festival before Earth, Wind, and Fire in Chicago were about to come out. So we played at a big stage in the part of the area. And somebody said, by the way, you do know Chuck Rainey is here. Chuck Rainey is the original bass player on Peg, and he lives in the Dallas area. And he was standing right over there.
That's funny.
Oh my gosh. So I think it's whether I really enjoy the song and then also how it feels on the saxophone. Those are the two. And I also think about how will the audience, that is also a factor, how the audience will respond to it.
You know, it's funny. I've mentioned this a couple of times over the course of the past 3 years. When you talk about music for your audience, you know, Chuck Berry was asked once, how do you do so many performances, how do you know what music your audience will like? And he said, I don't care what they like. I want to give them music and take them places they didn't expect to go.
Great
and he
point.
said, yeah, and he said, that's how you build fans, he said, taking people places they didn't expect to go.
Wow. Yeah, and he did that too.
Yeah. I love Chuck Berry. You know, there's so much we can talk about music during that period, AM radio, and there was such a wide variety of music which you don't have on radio anymore. It's hard to find.
Correct.
You know, so let's play another one of your songs, and then we'll talk some more. Let's play Kansas City Dreams.
Oh, Canyon Dreams. Yeah.
Oh, Canyon City Dreams. I apologize. I'm looking at it and I'm saying Kansas.
That's all right.
So tell everybody a little about Canyon City Dreams.
Well, behind my house was this wonderful view of a quiet canyon and a small lake. And so off my back porch, you could just sit there, and that's where the sun came up in the morning. It faced east, and very relaxing. And as a boy, I used to play back there and enjoy it back there. And it's kind of dreamy, you know. You could kind of go back there, take a walk, and get away from everything. You could just get away. And so that's what we did. And so this song just kind of came about. I was fooling around with some different sounds and ideas. And Darren Deshay, I wrote this and sent it to Darren. He put some beautiful acoustic guitar on it. And we just want to take you places, as Chuck Berry said.
There you go. All right. Well, let's hear Canyon City Dreams by Tom Braxton. Great, great, great song, Tom. I think I think Carlton Dennis hit it right on the head. It's so melodic. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Mel. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love that. We're starting to run down on time. I want to ask you a few more questions. I hope you can hang around a little longer.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
good, good. I know that you've done so many collaborations. If you could collaborate with any artist, a vocalist, a songwriter, a musician, a producer, arranger from any century, anywhere in the world, who would you collaborate with and why?
You know, that is a difficult question, and you asked me that. You told me to be pondering that, so I'm trying. Um, I would actually enjoy writing a song with Donald Fagen.
Oh, wow.
I really would. I've never had the opportunity to meet him, but I just love the way he puts together songs. I love the chords. I love just love the mood. And that it's hard because I mean, there's about 10 people, but I would just say that off the top of my head.
And what is it about Fagen's music that puts him at the head of the class?
I think I like I just love the way he uses chords. And I like the fact that um, from the very first notes, you know who it is. And I admire that. I mean, you just hear the introduction and oh, we know who that is. And that's hard to do. And he and Walter Becker were just able to do that. Um, his the melodic construction, the harmonic construction, the way he puts everything together, just enjoy it. I enjoy listening to it. So yeah, that would be fun. And he really does take you places. Your listeners may not be familiar with IGY, a project that he did.
I'm not even.
Yeah, he did a project that was all about him growing up in the 50s listening to radio. And it's amazing. It's a solo project that he did. It wasn't Steely Dan, but it still got that flavor to it. Amazing.
You know, I'm curious, because you mentioned Fagen and you've collaborated with Bob James and so many other artists, Kurt Whalen. I'm just curious, who would you say from all these musicians and artists that you've come in contact with, who would you say mentored you and gave you something special?
Well, two come to mind actually. Bernard Wright is the first one. I mentioned him because we sat down, and over a period of time, he infused some theory concepts that I was not familiar with because he had spent time with the masters. It's like the Max Roaches, the different people. He spent some time around Miles and some of these guys, and he said, okay, theoretically, I was at a certain place where we met, and he just raised that bar. He had a real influence on me about the time we were doing that first project. He talked to me a lot about playing inside of your game. Don't try to be somebody else. And he had I'd have to say musically, he probably had a huge influence on me. My father had a huge influence on me as far as just life and the business of music. He had a lot to say about just life itself and the business of music. So I've been blessed to have more than one person, but those two come to mind. Kirk Whalum is like a big brother. He's been a real big brother influence over me for years, and I just admire his talent and his staying power in the business.
Yeah, I'm just curious how you think about this. I know we were talking about the 70s and the 80s and when we started coming up and playing music. And there were so many clubs around. You can always go, and you mentioned in Lubbock, there weren't many clubs for jazz, but in a lot of places there were. And I'm just curious, How would a young person today get mentored?
That's a good point. It could start from a teaching relationship. In other words, if you're taking lessons from someone, if you're if you're taking some classes at school, those kind of things can develop into a mentor relationship. I've also had some young people that have come up to me after a show and said, "Hey, can I contact you?" And I've said, "Sure." And we've stayed in touch. So I think it just takes being assertive at times. Go see one of your favorite artists if you can, and see if they're open to sharing some time with you, either in person or online. And if not, they might be able to tell you somebody who can in your area.
That's another thing too. When you and I were going through public school, everyone had a music program.
Yeah.
And the first things that cut out from a lot of schools are physical education and music.
Yes.
And both of those are more important than English. If they cut them out.
We've got some problems in English too, but
yeah, but if you can't build your body and become healthy, and if you can't build your mind and become creative, and music is just a creative experience. They're taking out two of the most important elements of becoming a human being.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when I went to grad school and we studied the history of music education, it's actually been a fight to have music education in the curriculum since the very beginning, going all the way back to Lowell Mason in Massachusetts in the 1800s. They've been trying to. Plato even and Aristotle and different people talked about, hey, you've got to have the arts and different things for different reasons. So it's always been there. So yeah, we have to keep it going.
Definitely. I'm just curious about it. I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you because I'm curious. How did you develop your sax technique, and how has it been evolving? Because it's very unique. So how I'm sure you've seen changes in your own style over the years. How does it happen?
Well, I think part of it is growing up, where you grow up, who influences you, who you listen to. To me, in my opinion, there are different trees. There's the Cannonball Adderley tree. A lot of people grew up in that tree and they play like he does. There's the Sanborn tree. There's the and there's different tenor sax players that people are listen to and aspire to sound like them. And I think because growing up in Lubbock, I just wasn't under a particular tree. I listened to a lot of different people, and I also my father had me listening to a lot of the older guys, and he was big on several things. One in particular was Ben Webster, Lester Young, Coleman, all of them, they had their own sound. He said, you have to develop your own sound. And then he was also big on, when you pick up your saxophone, tell a story. Don't just play a whole lot of notes. Don't just play a ton of notes, tell a story. And so I think those things had an influence on me early on. And maybe in the meantime, yes, you develop, you continue to practice, you continue to grow, and you continue to work on technique. There's still parts of aspects of playing the saxophone that I'm working. As a matter of fact, I'll be practicing tonight. That's the way it is. You have to keep growing. You must keep growing.
Stevie Wonder is a master on the harmonica, and several years ago he had Frederick Yonnet, who's also a master on the harmonica, teach him how to bend notes.
Wow.
Yeah, and so even Stevie Wonder is, you have to be curious. If you're not curious, you're not going to be successful.
I'm a big sponge. When I get around people, I'll ask questions and I listen because I think you can learn something from everyone, young, old, and in between. So to me, it's an ongoing process. And the goal to me is getting better at what I do. And Kirk Whalum said this in an article that I thought it was crystallized the point. You want to get to a place where you move the saxophone out of the way and you can communicate directly to the audience. The saxophone isn't a hindrance. It doesn't keep you from communicating. And that's what I want to do is if I hear an idea, I want to be able to communicate that and not have the saxophone going, oh, no, you don't. You didn't practice that.
John Faddis said something like that at the trumpet. He said, if the instrument stands between you and the audience, get rid of it.
I need to remember. That's another quote I'm going to add to the arsenal, Mel.
Anyway, let's play the last song of the night. Let's play Sharon's Groove.
Ah, yes. And by the way, that lady on the front is not Sharon. This is Sharon right here. That is Sharon's Groove.
I get you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece of artwork. But people, was that your wife? I'm like, no, that's just some artwork. I
thought it was.
She looks
Why
great.
don't you tell everybody a little bit about the background on Sharon's Groove?
Well, it's long overdue. I'd written songs for our sons. We've been married for 34 years, and but this was a few years ago, and I said I hadn't written a song for my wife, so I wrote two. I was in trouble. So, but no, she's not like that. But I wrote two for her on Looking Up. One is As Long as I'm With You, and I came up. She had this little thing she was singing around the house, and I appropriated some ideas and added things to it, and called it simply Sharon's Groove. And I thought it was going to get a fancier title, and it just stayed Sharon's Groove. So that's it.
That's great. Okay. Let's hear Tom Braxton's Sharon's Groove, and then we'll come back and wrap up. Here it is, a tale of two parts. Great counter rhythms, Tom. You the man.
Thank you, Carlton.
Yeah, you must be. He's listening very carefully to the structure of your music, apparently.
Yeah, and that's her personality. She is a fun, unbelievable person. So yeah, she's awesome.
That's wonderful. Tom, I want to thank you so much. You know, the problem with this show is it's too short.
Well, there's so much to cover, and you ask great questions, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I love the music. Offline, I'll tell you a story about how I got into music, and it involves Lubbock, Texas, oddly enough.
Oh, yeah, there's a rich history there, I'll tell you. When I was inducted into that West Texas Hall of Fame with my father that same year, I realized how many people came from that area. Roy Orbison, Buddy Holly.
Yeah, I know.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I love Roy Orbison. That was the most operatic voice I've ever heard, you know, in contemporary music. It's just beautiful. Why don't you tell people, Tom, how they can buy your music, where they can find it, how they can become a fan, and how they can get in contact with you?
Well, they can go to www.tombraxton.com. For the website, they can sign up for the BRAC pack. That's BRACK pack, and we'll email you. They can also please join the Facebook family at Tom Braxton Music. That's our Facebook, and we'd love to have you join us there and on Instagram. And then, as far as music, iTunes, Amazon, all the platforms, you can buy it and stream it. So it's available. Intervision, my record company, has done a really good job of getting the music out there. So we would love to have you, if you're new to the family, join us, take some music, buy some music, stream some music. So those are the best ways to stay in touch with us, because we're trying to continue to build our following in certain areas, and we'll let you know when we're coming to your neighborhood, and we want you to come out and see us play live.
Terrific. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough. It's been a pleasure. And I definitely want to have you back again so we can talk some more about your career.
Well, I've had a blast. Thank you for connecting me through the Power Hour to your listeners on the Source. And I had a blast, and I look forward to coming your way again.
Yeah, we have just a tad under 200,000 people from all over the world clicking in on the station.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And by the way, this goes back to the UK, and the BBC redistributes it to at least to 160,000 different affiliates.
That is amazing. Well, thank you so much for the exposure.
My pleasure. And if you stick around after, we can chat for a minute.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Okay, great, Tom. Take care of yourself.
All right. Thank you so much.
Well, everybody, that concludes another edition of the Power Hour. Next week, we're having another phenomenal artist, Rebecca Jade. And we'll continue to bring great artists to you every week on the Power Hour. So be sure to tune in again next week for another edition of the Power Hour. And I'll just say good night to everybody and enjoy the week. I'm Mel Albin. I'm the host and the founder of the Jazz Confusion Power Hour.
My name is Parson, and I'm honored to share my passion of music with you, our listening audience, through my cultural heritage.
Things can change for you too. If you want to be brand new, that is absolutely possible.